Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today I'm joined by Ryan Delaney, a well-being advocate who quit Fortune 500 sales to find real freedom, now an advocate of self-acceptance over self-improvement. Ryan is on a mission to help 1 million humans stop battling themselves and start being their own best friend through his insightful tweets and penetrating newsletter, Beyond Self-Improvement. Welcome, Ryan. So great to have you.
Yeah, glad to be here, Daryl.
Really glad you're here. You know, we've kind of gone back and forth on X for a period of time. And, you know, there's certain people that you just kind of feel like, okay, there's some kind of connect there, right? You know, we throw things out there and we kind of know what each other is talking about, which I think is pretty cool, which always leaves me wondering, you know, what is the story? What brought Ryan Delaney to the mission to help 1 million humans stop battling themselves? I think we start there and see where we go.
Yeah, great question. I think my story is probably, similar to everybody else's story. And I like the way Eckhart Tolle described it as that you fail at life. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, yeah, that I can relate to that, because I feel like I tried to do all the things that I thought I was supposed to do, whether it's academics or sports or going to school and going back to grad school and working for, the right industries and the right companies and Fortune 500 this and doing hobbies and doing a lot of even self-improvement stuff. I got interested in nutrition in high school and thinking that if you were healthy, then you'll be happy. And then I got into, exercise and lifting weights 6 days a week for a couple of years, and taking cold showers, just anything that I could think of to try to be happier. And by the time I was 31, I was just profoundly dissatisfied. That's just the feeling that I had, just this incredible dissatisfaction. And this real sense of disillusionment with, wow, like I thought I've tried everything and nothing's working, and I'm more unhappy than ever. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I don't think this, what I'm doing is working. I need to try something else. And so I said, okay, I got to, and I remember thinking that somebody somewhere across time must have realized a better way to live. And I'd heard, about meditation, but I never thought I could calm my mind. And I'd met someone maybe a couple years before who was actually meditating and who was practicing yoga. And I thought, maybe I should try yoga. So the local gym, this is in 2000, the local gym had a yoga class. And so I just went there. And it was very awkward at first and uncomfortable, but then eventually I started noticing, like, wow, I feel this sense of like lightness and ease, and like the experience to me felt like sort of like walking on the moon when I walked from the gym back home. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And the last thing I'll say about that is that it never lasted. So I felt good when I was in class. I felt good shortly after class, but then I'd go back to my old self. And so then the next really 10, 15 years was all about trying to figure out, how can I feel good throughout the day, not just when I'm in yoga or meditating or, obviously doing fun activities with friends or something like that, but how can I bring that with me day to day, moment to moment? And then eventually I found mindfulness. And to me, that was the thing that really changed everything.
Yeah, that's the trick. And I found that for myself. And thank you for sharing that, Ryan. I think it takes a bunch of things, and it takes a lot of, as you mentioned early on, it takes a lot of failure. And I hate to say it, but I'm fairly happy that I've failed at a lot of things in life, because many things have worked out and many things have just changed over time. But but you're talking about the exploration, and that is such an important thing for me. And I've done 1,000 things, and not necessarily early on when I was just starting to, recovering from drug and alcohol addiction, that sort of thing. It was okay. How do I find happy? And then as time went on, I started to feel a little peaceful and a little more peaceful. And then it kind of reverberated into longer times. And, and at one point I was like, oh, I haven't had a bad day in a long time, and it's such a cool thing because as we expand, everything expands, and the joy expands, the contentment expands, the ability to feel all this stuff expands. It's a very cool thing. So, and I think we're all searching, right? We're all searching for a contentment or a peace or a happiness, or however we would define that, which I think is a really cool thing. It's just, how are we going about achieving that? And I've done the yoga and I've done the meditation, and I don't do the yoga stuff like I did. I've got a couple of body parts that have been replaced, so it's not quite as easy as it used to be. But so given that story, who has been, or what has been, have you found to be your greatest adversary over the time that you've embarked upon this journey?
I mean, definitely myself. It's like that old saying, so we found the enemy, and it is us. And it took me a really long time to realize that. Like I was masterful at hiding out and projecting all my frustrations and anger and rage and loneliness and just unpleasant feelings onto the world and society, other people, everything, anything I can blame, I was blaming. And what I found is that when I'm in pain, my mind is always searching for something to blame. It never really wants to take responsibility for that could be coming from within. And so it's a strange thing, but it's like that fighting with myself has ultimately created all the problems in my life, because it's like the world is what it is, and everything is neutral, and it's just how I'm experiencing myself, and my relationship with myself creates my relationship, like you were saying earlier, with the rest of the world and other people. And so all the conflict I was having with other people, all the judgment I would have, all the frustration, I was like the king of irritation. Everything bothered me, every little thing. And friends wouldn't get bothered by certain things. I'm like, wow, how do you do that? How do you not be bothered by that driver or something? But I had no idea that so much of that was coming from within me. And so it really wasn't until, I would say, probably after divorce, and I was going through divorce and thinking, okay, why am my first 2 long-term relationships have failed? Haven't had as much success in my career that I would have liked, in terms of not necessarily just because I had good jobs and good income and things, but it was just a matter of me not feeling satisfied with it. And why am I not more aligned and really enjoying the work that I'm doing? And what I, and I remember listening to audiobook that I've been listening to over and over again from Jack Kornfield, who's one of the big Buddhist meditation teachers in the US. And there was some sort of quote, I'm going to misquote this, but he basically said that, the beginning and the end of spiritual practice, or no, sorry, let me rephrase that. Stopping the war within and stopping the war without and coming to rest in the center of our heart is the beginning and the end of spiritual practice. And when I heard that, it really struck a chord. It's like, oh, okay, so here's a guy who knows what he's talking about, has been doing this for decades. And so it's about stopping the war within, stopping the war without, and not just that, but also then how do you cultivate like open your heart, because my heart had always been so protected, so closed off, and not wanting to be hurt, like I guess I had been when I was a kid. And 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 learning to, be kinder to myself, more compassionate with myself, give myself more grace, and ultimately allowing myself to be human. Because for me, it was all about trying to be superhuman, trying to be perfect, trying to be beyond, all the frailties and messiness and limitations of being a human being. I sort of bought into this whole idea. And it's a weird thing, because when you have conditioning that kind of tells you you're not good enough, then it's like there's this desire that I felt that, oh, I've got to prove myself. I've got to make myself good enough all the time and be worthy. And once I saw that this conditioning wasn't coming from me, but from childhood, which is reinforced by society, and then society has all these like 30 under 30 lists or 40 under 40 lists, and all these people doing amazing, like superhuman feats. And then I start comparing myself to those people and thinking like, I should be like them. I should. And just a recipe for misery. I was such an unhappy person, chronic anxiety, chronic depression.
I'm so happy that things have turned around, Ryan. I mean, that's just a really cool thing, and it's powerful because it tells us. And there was a guy named Jack Boland. He was actually a minister of a church called Unity Church, and he was a sober guy. And I've been a sober guy for a long time, but he used to say, "What man has done, man can do." And I always used to think about that as I'd listen to his cassette tapes in my car while I'm driving around, and I'm listening to Deepak and listening to all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, I know that if these people can do this and find peace and find contentment and find happiness, why can't I? And the answer is I can, and I have, and you have, and I think that's such an important, powerful message for people to hear that may, still be doing a lot of struggling and still not sure exactly where to go or how to get there or what to do. So that's a great message that you're imparting, honestly, just by being here and telling your story and how things have changed for you. So I'm so happy for you. What do you see as sort of, next steps in terms of what you're doing? Do you have anything sort of different planned as far as your daily habits, your daily things, or you do your thing and go on about life and it's working?
Yeah. I mean, I've done so much inner work, and there were times where I was just like, it was like the biggest priority of my life, just spending hours a day on doing inner work. And it was all really beneficial, and it was all helpful. And I'm glad I did it. But at the same time, there was other things that I wanted to do. And I kind of realized that, like giving back was something that I had been wanting to do because I hadn't benefited so much from the spiritual practices and doing the inner work and healing work and so forth. So that piece was sort of missing from my life. And then there was also the career stuff too. Like I just didn't feel the satisfaction with it. So I wanted to, and I kind of realized like, okay, so the spiritual stuff has really brought a lot of profound peace and contentment and joy. But there were some missing pieces. And so that's where I'm spending the majority of my time now, less so on my personal growth and spiritual growth, but more about how can I give back? How can I, pay this forward, if you will? Just like people gave to me, because so many people have benefited my life from all their wisdom, whether it was the yoga teachers or the meditation teachers, the Buddhist teachers, or, countless other people, spiritual friends. And so I feel like, just this, and I'm sure everybody else has the same experience. It's like I think that we have this deep longing to give back to society, to contribute to, and at a certain point, not just because you're on the spiritual path, but I think because you get older too. It's like, okay, I've done I'm focused on career and making money and material stuff. I've tried all that stuff, and I taking care of myself in that way. So how can I give back? But now I've lost my train of thought. Original.
That's fine. I can jump in there because that is, and you sort of delineated between personal growth and giving back, but I think that is the next step in our personal and spiritual and the growth of our beings, because that's how we let it flow, right? That's how we let it flow from whence it comes, which is inside of us. But I just kind of look at it as it just flows through us, and we can push it toward other people and help other people. And that's a huge thing for me in my life now. You mentioned about, the professional career and that sort of thing. And I had a similar experience. And you also mentioned the should monster, which I absolutely adore, the should monster. But I had that same thing, and I grew up with a very blue collar upbringing, and so I didn't know anything about business or sales or anything like that. So I got involved after school in sales, just sort of by the way, and that was interesting because I had such a sort of blue collar foundation and trying to be the guy who put on the suit and put on the tie and went out and talked to people about things that I didn't understand. And it was an interesting process trying to develop that. But in conjunction with that, I also was very involved in trying to develop myself. And, that was an interesting dynamic because it's difficult. They're both full-time jobs. They're really both full-time jobs. So, right, I take a little bit what I can get on my personal growth. I grab a little business stuff, and I'm kind of, moving up as well as I can. And the other thing that you mentioned about that was the should monster, which I you didn't call it a monster. I call it a monster, but just shoulding ourselves into in some of the circles I've been around, we talk about shoulding all over ourselves. And that's something that I've done a ton of in my life. And it's interesting how some of those things fall away, not because we want them to fall away, but because they fall away with what we're practicing, that it just sort of drops off. Have you found that to be the case in your journey?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to mention that I think it's interesting. You went into sales. I went into sales too, and so we have that shared background. And then I get the sense that you're talking about listening to tapes, probably in your car, just like I was listening to tapes in the car, going to appointments to talk to prospects. Constantly, right? Every single time. Stop listening to music, and you just, yeah.
Because I'm flipping out. I'm like, oh, how do I do all this life stuff? And I'm trying to figure it out on my way to sales meetings or whatever, right? It's interesting.
Yeah. So in the Buddhist community, they say, or maybe it was the Buddha way back when, it said that the way people come to the path, the spiritual path, is through suffering. I mean, why else did you come here? And so I was suffering. So yeah, I was motivated to find answers, just like you. Let's see. Your question was. I apologize, Daryl. Can you say that one more time?
Oh, no, that's fine. Just talking about the last thing I was talking about was the should monster in terms of just, how that hits. But as far as things dropping off over time, sort of naturally, that, have you found that to be true in terms of how things fall away as we just practice, some of that stuff just falls away?
Yeah, to me, I think that's one of the most misunderstood things about practice. And I think that's really where the difference is between sort of the Western approach, which I was doing for the first, 15 years, which to me, and I don't mean to badmouth self-improvement, but from my perspective, it was all about like, oh, how can I change who I am? How can I acquire something? How can I get things? If I have more achievement, I'll be happy. If I get more accolades, I'll be happy. If I look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, somehow I'll look happy. And none of those things ever Yeah, I'm an ectomorph. That was never going to happen. Um, all those things never brought me any kind of lasting satisfaction at all. And then there was like this whole idea of like willpower. Well, if I could just, train my mind to think positively, or if I could just,
Mm.
whenever a negative thought comes up, I'll just push it away, or that stuff just never worked. Any of the self-help
Yeah.
books never worked. And I thought I was the one who was flawed. I'm like, wait a second, if people are saying this stuff works and they're selling millions of copies of the books and everybody's talking about it, and I thought it kind of reinforced the fact that I was broken and flawed. So it really wasn't until, getting into spiritual practices where they say, wait a second, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not flawed. You're born whole and complete. You've just been conditioned in your family, which is reinforced by society. And so there is nothing wrong with you. And when you do these practices, it's not about acquiring anything or gaining anything or improving yourself. It's simply about, like you said, when you practice as a byproduct of that, good things happen. And I wrote a tweet the other day about how people sort of these days brag about quitting alcohol, and to me, I'm not an expert about quitting alcohol, but I have my own relationship with alcohol, and I used to abuse alcohol in college because I had incredible social anxiety, and it was the only way that I could just relax enough to talk to people. So for a couple decades, I battled with it, and I tried willpower, I tried quitting, I tried this and that, and nothing. It just never stuck. And I always felt like this drive to drink in social situations, and it really bothered me. And and it really wasn't until I kind of trusted that the more time I spend on the spiritual path, and the more inner work and the more healing that I do, and more awakening that happens, that I was hoping that this desire, this not even desire, but compulsion to drink would drop off. And eventually it did. And that was maybe about a dozen years ago. It finally was like, okay. And now it's really just purely a choice. It's like, okay, if I feel like that, I do, and if I don't, I don't. And I rarely feel like drinking. So yeah, and that's one of the core messages I would love to be able to communicate to people, because it's so different, that Western view versus what I call an Eastern view, which may not be accurate or not, but of approaching, right? This acquiring or gaining versus getting back to that original wholeness and completeness that you were when you were born, that you're not broken, you're not flawed, you're not, a bad person. So it's removing that conditioning that is preventing us or blocking us from this happiness, this joy, this contentment, this peace that is always there. It's just basically removing the conditioning that's getting in the way from us from experiencing that. And that's been my personal experience. And that view has been profoundly transformative for me, because I had the exact opposite view. It's all about how can I fix myself and how can I gain things in order to be happy. But I found the opposite is true.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like my life has been sort of a hybrid model of, of Eastern and Western, and I love the Eastern thought, and I love there's two college classes that I actually remember, and they're not the classes that I remember. I just remember a couple of moments in classes, and one of the quotes that I sort of lodged in my brain was from English 101. It was my freshman year, and I'm pretty sure it was Emerson, but the quoter did not lodge in my brain, just the quote, and it was, "In taking risks, you will triumph." And I thought that was just the coolest thing, because I had no idea. I'm like, what is going on? What does this mean? What is this? And I was a risk-taking kid. I would do the dumbest things you ever heard of, but it wasn't that's not exactly what they were talking about. They weren't talking about jumping off the roof and, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So anyway, so that's the one that I remember. And then the other one was East Asian civilizations. And that I remember the talking about the Buddhism and Taoism and legalism and Confucianism and all that sort of stuff. And that just fascinated the heck out of me. the other thing that fascinated the heck out of me about that was the Bushido, the code, the samurai code, and the honor, and if they dishonor themselves or their family, they'll take themselves out, and that's some pretty hardcore stuff. But for whatever reason, it lodged, and I thought about that. So that led me down, more of an Eastern path in terms of what I was doing with my, spiritual growth. And then, in taking Risk You Will Triumph also led me down okay, let's see what we can do with business, and let's not struggle with money and that sort of stuff. So it was kind of a hybrid model, and it's been very interesting, and it's been wonderful. But I know that I would not have been, I would not have done well in the Western model if I had not taken, and I'm using your words because I love how you think about it. I wouldn't have done well in the Western model had I not been doing my stuff on the Eastern side. If that makes sense. Right. Yeah.
Sense. Yeah.
I had a mentor one time tell me, first things first and the rest shall be added on. And that meant, he didn't say it, and I'm just picking this out of it today, almost 40 years later, but he was saying, do the Eastern stuff and the Western stuff will take care of itself, which is a pretty cool thing.
It is, because both are necessary, right? Like you're saying, both are vital. And it's just sort of this paradox between the two that we kind of play between, because there is a need to, when I first started meditating, I had no ability to do habits, I hadn't formed that ability whatsoever, although I knew something was really important. I just didn't know how to do it. So I started with 1 minute a day. I just gave myself the easiest possible thing. So, okay, I'll just do the minimal amount, and kind of, that was a little bit of experimental trial and error. I would feel good and I would continue. And then it was like, and the next day I was like, I can't do 10 minutes. I don't have time. So I was like, okay, just do 1 minute. And, but there's the discipline in that, right? Like I didn't want to sit and even meditate for 1 minute. I just wanted to, do whatever. Or I didn't, when I was in the car, I love listening to music. I love music. It's one of the great joys of my life. So for me to give that up, to listen to talks or audiobooks or whatever, was a big deal. But I sometimes I didn't want to, and I just wanted to listen to music, but I would just push myself to do it. So I feel like there's that was that Western kind of like, I need to push myself. I need to have discipline. I need to, do this thing that I know is good for me, but maybe not as fun or joyful as other things that I could be doing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting how, and I think even now, I mean, I'm 58 years old, so I'm not a young dude, and I think we didn't have as many distractions when I was coming up, and now there's just an amazing amount of directions that a person can go, and I don't know how people make that choice, but in terms of which direction to go, but like you mentioned, it's the struggle that allows us to move in a different direction. So let's talk a little bit about your quest and your mission to help 1 million humans stop battling themselves. And why don't we tie that in with your newsletter, which I've enjoyed very much, Beyond Self-Improvement.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of, the initial part of me being in the spiritual path was about wanting to find peace, some sort of peace of mind, sort of escaping the pain and sorrow that I was in. And so calming was a big part of it. It's like, okay, feeling just a little more calm, and gaining clarity and having some self-understanding, and having changes in perceptions, and then having realizations and all kinds of good things. But underneath it all, there was still, I think, this fighting myself and still not truly accepting who I was, and not fundamentally loving myself and appreciating who I was. And so, in some ways, it's like, I guess I could call it that spiritual bypass, this idea that, if I could just use the power of my mind, or, the spiritual technologies or whatever, to bypass my this really deep inner work that needed to happen, And it wasn't happening. And I realized there was healing that needed to happen. That certain amount of healing was happening maybe in places like meditation retreats where I was sitting with pain for days on end. But I realized there was a lot of wounding from childhood that I never even realized existed until I started looking at it and going to therapy and going to workshops and EMDR and things like that, and that I started to heal. And then going to a workshop about that was all about loving yourself. And it was just a weekend workshop. But I remember thinking, this is going to be a tough workshop for me because this is the thing that I know I still don't love myself. And I remember one of the practices was to go off on our own and take this mirror and look in the mirror and talk lovingly to ourselves. And they gave us prompts on what we could say and how we could talk. And I just remember just all the resistance came up, all the strategies of like getting tired and yawning and like, I don't want to do this, and saying this is stupid and this is dumb, and kind of like I felt like a kid or a teenager again. Anyway, I pushed through that. I said, okay, I got to do this thing. I came here, I paid for this workshop, I got to do it. And that was sort of the start of truly, I feel like, learning to make peace with myself and actually love myself and appreciate myself and build a really healthy relationship with myself. And that was really one of the last things I feel like after, whatever that was, maybe, I want to say like 8 years ago. So I've been on the spiritual path for a long time. So I felt like self-acceptance, self-love, self-appreciation was one of the more later things on my path. And I feel like it's probably one of the hardest things for us to do is to make peace with ourselves, stop that inner war, and just truly learn to accept ourselves. And I think it's just, I noticed from my own experience is that when I stopped battling myself, I stopped battling the world. When I made peace with myself, like you said, all the conflict with other people just kind of dropped off. And actually what's transformed is that I realize I love people. Like, people are the best part of my life. I also like to joke that they're the worst part of my life too, because they cause me the most pain. But you don't get one without the other, right?
Right.
So self-acceptance is what I preach in my newsletter and on Twitter, because I think it is one of the most powerful things and most transformative. There's a lot of other things that feed into it, which are equally important, but this is kind of the thing that I talk most about.
Yeah, I'd say, and I enjoy your newsletter immensely, and I love reading it, and many times I like to just comment and ruminate and whatever, and it's cool. I like reading things where, where I can tell somebody's been there, somebody's experienced it, and this thing called life, and they've thought about it, and they've found what resonates, and that's a really cool thing. That's a very powerful thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to, we're going to wrap up fairly soon, but if you were to give some sort of advice to someone who's beginning on this journey, who knows they need to maybe stop fighting themselves and stop fighting life, but they're not exactly sure where to start, what would you tell them?
Great question. I think for me, where it all started was awareness, and cultivating that awareness so that I can see what is happening. And when I understand what's happening, then I can start making choices. And so I would encourage anybody to do any kind of practices that resonate with them, that help them develop that awareness. For me, it happened to be sitting meditation, and then mindfulness, which is sort of like active meditation, if you will. And those are the two things that have really helped me see more clearly, have awareness of what's going on inside me, what's going on outside of me. And from there, again, then there's choices can be made. My nervous system calms down with those practices, not as emotionally reactive. And when everything kind of quiets down, then I feel like that's sort of like the foundation from which you can everything kind of comes out of that, in my experience.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's absolutely crucial. And you know, I grew up sort of in the 12 steps early on as my roadmap to living. And because I was 19 when I started, you know, looking at things and had to look at things. And there were three little sort of sections of how they explain the 12 steps, which was trust God, clean house, help others. And, you know, you can substitute God for universe or great intelligence or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And I don't want people to get turned off by that word, because I actually have so little connotation to what that means. I don't even consider what that means anymore in terms of that power. But you know, it's like you said, awareness. And I think that's great advice. You know, we have to slow down enough, and we have to release distractions long enough to be able to see what's going on, you know, and be able to touch and feel what's going on. And that, you know, I guess one thing I would just say about that to anyone who's thinking about a journey like this is it takes time, and it takes time to heal, and it takes time to get to different steps in the process. But I can say, just like we talked about earlier, when you look back, it's amazing how things that you never knew could change are all of a sudden changed. And that's a really cool thing. So Ryan, how do we find you out there in this vast universe of information, and how do we plug into your newsletter and whatever else you'd like us to know?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find me could be on Twitter, which is handle at R Delaney, DELANEY, or newsletter, which is newsletter.ryandelaney.co. So RYANDELANEY.co. Very
cool. Yeah, and I'll put this stuff in the show notes for anybody who's you know, looking forward or didn't have a pencil or pen or whatever to write things down. So we'll make sure that we get that information out there, Ryan. And I very much appreciate your wisdom and your insights and some of the lessons that you learned, and you know, talking about this fight that we wage with ourselves, and how we can alleviate it, which is, you know, the most important part. So thank you so much for everything. Pleasure having you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. I'm excited for the work you're doing, and it's been a pleasure to be on here with you. You made my morning.
Oh, good. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. Well, we'll talk again. We'll do it again. And I know I'll be seeing you on X real soon. Maybe we can do a space together or something.
Sounds good. I like that.
All right. Take care, Ryan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.